Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to this lecture on neoplasia. In today's lecture, we will talk about cancer epidemiology, which means the study of cancer in populations, as well as a little bit about carcinogenesis, mainly chemical and radiation carcinogenesis. What is carcinogenesis? Carcinogenesis is the way cancer develops, the genesis of cancer when it occurs due to certain substances such as chemicals and due to exposure to radiation. Okay. So, why should we study cancer epidemiology? Now, it is very important to understand the epidemiology of cancer, because this will give us a clue to the etiology of many cancers and how a population as a whole is exposed to certain cancers, are more prone for certain cancers, and why certain populations are not prone for certain cancers. So, it will help us enormously to understand how cancer develops and why it is different in different populations, what are the different environmental factors that predispose to cancer, and so on and so forth. So, it gives us clue to the etiology of many cancers, and the glaring example of this is of course cigarette smoking and tobacco, which is linked to lung cancer. And the second example is the lack of dietary fibers, especially in the Western societies, which can lead to colon cancer. So, these are certain examples of how epidemiological studies have helped us understand cancers, the etiology of cancers better. Now, we will look at the incidence of cancer worldwide. In 2012, there were 14.1 million new cancer cases worldwide, with nearly 8.2 million deaths. Now, this is the WHO data on cancer. Now, you can see that nearly 50% or more than 50% of people who develop cancer die due to the disease. So, it is a very high mortality. The commonest cancer among men is lung in the 2012 data, and breast cancer in women. Now, the death rates have been decreasing in the developed world. This is because of many reasons. These cancers are picked up early in those parts of the world. They have better economic conditions. They have different cancers. So, the death rates have been decreasing. Some cancers like those of the cervix and stomach are decreasing quite a bit in the developed world. This is because, as you know, cervical cancer has a screening program in those parts of the world, and they are picked up very, very early and can be treated. Whereas, the same cannot be said about countries like India, where still cancer mortality is very, very high. And it is projected that by 2035, we will have nearly double these number of cancer cases or even more. So, what are the environmental factors that affect the development of cancer, and how is it different from different countries? Now, it is seen that for some reason gastric cancers are much higher in Japan. This could be due to some of the food habits that are prevalent in that country. There is a high consumption of salted food, high consumption of smoked foods. So, that could be one of the reasons. whereas breast cancers are very high in the USA and not so much in Japan. There could be features of diet that affect the development of cancer. For instance, obesity is known to predispose to many cancers. Smoking, of course, even everyone knows that smoking is a highly cancer causing substance. So, you have with smoking you have many kinds of cancers that can develop, such as upper aerodigestive cancer, lung cancer, urinary bladder cancer and pancreatic cancer. Chewing of tobacco, which is quite common in this part of the world, can lead to oral cavity cancers and other upper aerodigestive cancers. Consumption of alcohol has been linked to oropharyngeal cancers, laryngeal cancers, esophageal cancer and even hepatocellular or liver cancer. Reproductive history has a role to play. You have in people who have prolonged estrogen exposure, you have cancers of the breast and endometrium are common in these women. And finally, we even now know today that infectious agents such as certain viruses and bacteria can cause cancer. What is the relationship between age and cancer? Now, cancer in general is a disease of an increasing age. So, the maximum number of cancers occur between the age group of 55 and 75. This does not mean that children do not suffer from cancer. Cancers are also known to occur in children. There is certain types of cancers that occur in children, but they are far less common when compared to cancers that occur in adults. Now, this is quite understandable because as we will learn later, the acquisition of mutations is what causes cancer, and as a person ages, you can expect that more and more mutations could occur, could accumulate in the cells, and that could lead to cancerous growth. And of course, with age you also have a decline in immune function. So, as you know and as we will be discussing later, tumors also are kept under control because of a good immunity, and as with age, since the immune function becomes less and less, these patients are more prone to develop cancer. Certain predisposing conditions that are acquired can lead to cancer. For instance, chronic inflammation can lead to certain cancers such as those of the mesothelial lining, what are known as mesotheliomas, and lymphomas can occur in people who have chronic inflammations. Immunodeficiency states, we already talked about a lessening immune status can lead to cancer. So, you can imagine cancers are more common in people who have immunodeficiencies, such as people who suffer from HIV and so on. Certain precursor lesions can develop into cancer, such as chronic irritation causing squamous metaplasia of the respiratory tract. Now, this could be due to smoking or whatever, and that could eventually lead to dysplasia, and finally it could lead to cancer. Endometrial hyperplasia of the lining of the uterus, the endometrial lining can undergo hyperplasia, further on it can undergo dysplasia, and further on it could lead to cancer. Leukoplakia, or a white plaque in the patch in the oral cavity, if it has dysplastic changes, could lead on to cancer. And villous adenoma of the colon is now known to be a predisposing condition that can lead to colonic adenocarcinoma. Right. There are also some genetic factors that are known to predispose to cancer. because this is something that that really interests the lay person. My mother suffered from cancer, my aunt suffered from cancer, my sister suffered from cancer. So, am I prone to cancer? These are some of the questions that doctors are constantly asked. And we now know that there are inherited genes that can predispose to cancer, and but however, it is not so simple that if you inherit a gene you will develop the cancer, because it is a very complex interplay between genetic and environmental factors. Now, there are a whole lot of genes. If you inherit, you could inherit the cancer syndromes associated with those. I will just name a few of the important ones: the RB gene leading to retinoblastoma, the P53 gene leading to the Lee-Fraumeni syndrome, and which causes various tumors. The APC gene leading on to the FAP, or familial adenomatous polyposis core colon cancer, and so on. And you have familial cancer, where there is familial clustering of cases, but role of inherited predisposition is not clear. So, these are some of the established cancer syndromes. But in many other cancers, common cancers such as those of breast and so on, while we know that some genes predispose to cancer, but we also, like the BRCA1 gene, the BRCA1 gene or the BRCA1 gene, but we also know that many of the familial cases we have still not narrowed upon the genes that could be causing those cancers. So, not everything is known about the genetic inheritance of the common cancers. With this brief overview about the genetics behind cancer and the epidemiology of cancer, we will then move on to some of the cancer causing agents or carcinogenic agents. This is an important topic because we now know that in the environment or in the course of one's life, one may be exposed to carcinogenic agents, and this may predispose the individual to develop certain cancers. Now, we will be learning in our subsequent classes that cancer can occur only when there is a genetic change within the cell, and therefore, the carcinogenic agents that we will be talking about primarily inflict genetic damage in the cells, and that leads to the cancerous transformation of the cells. Now, there are three classes of carcinogenic agents. The first is chemical, which is an important cause for carcinogenesis. The second is radiation induced, and finally, the infective or the microbial causes. Now, in this lecture, we will only be talking about chemical and radiation carcinogenesis. The microbe induced or the virus induced cancers we will deal with in a subsequent lecture. Right. 200 years ago, there was a London based surgeon called Sir Percival Pott, who for the first time established that there could be an environmental link to the development of cancer. What he found was that there was an increased incidence of scrotal cancer among the chimney sweeps, and this was probably, and they introduced a legislation against this activity, and that really reduced the number of cases of scrotal cancer. So, this one public health policy measure led to an enormous change in the incidence of scrotal cancer. So, that is the power of epidemiological studies and and to be able to see these associations. Now, why did these chimney sweeps develop scrotal cancer? So, probably it was because of a carcinogenic agent they were being exposed to. And today we know that that was a benzopyrene, which gets produced by the burning of coal. Now, before we go into that, there is a way of classifying chemical carcinogens either as direct acting or indirect acting. This is based on the fact that some of the chemical carcinogens can directly cause a change in the genetic nature of the cell, and they do not need an additional agent to do that. These are known as direct acting chemical carcinogens. The most the best example of this would be some of the alkylating agents that are used in the treatment of cancer. It is ironic that we use certain agents to treat cancer, and because of the use of these agents, the individuals or the patients can later on develop a second cancer. And because these are the alkylating drugs, the drugs that are used in the treatment of cancer could lead to genetic damage and the development of a further cancer in the latter years. So, these are direct acting carcinogenic agents. The indirect acting ones require a metabolic conversion to an ultimate carcinogen. So, the most potent of these are the polycyclic hydrocarbons. For example, the benzopyrenes, which I already mentioned, which can cause lung cancer and also the scrotal cancer of the chimney sweeps that we talked about. Other examples are aromatic amines and azodyes, which are used in the rubber industry. They can cause urinary bladder cancer. Now, all these indirect acting chemical carcinogens have to be converted into an active agent by a P450 dependent monooxygenase. Now, some individuals have better way of they have a more efficient way of converting these carcinogens, whereas certain others do not. So, that is a genetically acquired trait. The P50 dependent monooxygenase is a genetically acquired trait. So, according to what kind of conversion you are capable of, different individuals have different rates of developing these cancers, although they are exposed uniformly to the same chemical carcinogen. So, in other words, the exposure and the development of cancers is limited by the genetic ability to convert these carcinogenic agents by the P450 dependent monooxygenase. Now, there is also another substance called aflatoxin B1, which can grow in improperly stored nuts and so on, and these can cause hepatocellular cancer. Here is a list of all the agents that we know of which could cause cancer, either directly acting or such as the alkylating agents and the acylating agents, and the ones that require metabolic activations or the procarcinogens. They are also known as the procarcinogens, which include the polycyclic and aromatic hydrocarbons, the aromatic amines, and natural plant products such as aflatoxin, which I already mentioned. Now, how do these chemical carcinogens cause the development of cancer? As I already mentioned, they are mutagenic. That means they cause a mutation in the gene, and they contain a highly reactive electrophile group that combines with the DNA, forming a DNA adduct. And this process of the chemical combining with the DNA of the cell and forming an adduct is known as the initiation phase of chemical carcinogenesis. Subsequently, these initiated cells expand and may develop into the tumor due to other substances which are known as promoters. So, there are two phases in which chemical carcinogenesis occurs. The first is initiation and the second is promotion. So, this is a picture that shows the two processes. You have a carcinogen which gets metabolically activated, and the active ingredient is the electrophilic intermediates. and they bind to the DNA forming the adduct, and that forms a permanent DNA lesion or a mutation. And if these cells undergo proliferation and they form a pre-neoplastic clone, which ultimately forms a malignant neoplasm, and the first part of this process is known as initiation and the second part is known as the promotion. Now, normally during our lifetime, all of us are exposed to a whole lot of carcinogens, but not all of us develop these cancers. So, why is that? So, because normally the cell has a DNA repair mechanism which is constantly working and trying to repair all these DNA damages that could have been occurring due to initiation processes. Only when these DNA repair mechanisms are overwhelmed by a whole lot of chemical carcinogens does it fail, and then you have permanent DNA lesions that are passed on to daughter cells, forming ultimately the cancer cell. Now, the next is radiation carcinogenesis. Radiation, as we know, is a very potent carcinogenic agent, and we have examples from natural disasters, from nuclear bombs, such as examples from the Hiroshima Nagasaki incident, where people developed a whole lot, the survivors developed a whole lot of cancers, and they still do because of the permanent genetic damages that they have suffered due to the radiation, especially those of thyroid and other organs. And also the survivors of the Chernobyl incident in Russia, they are also prone to develop a lot of cancers. People who receive radiation therapy are also known to develop certain cancers. Again, a therapeutic agent here, ironically becoming a carcinogenic agent. People who get radiation in the head and neck region, for instance, are known to develop carcinomas of the thyroid later on. So, this can lead to cancer. Now, how does radiation cause cancer? It causes cancer because it can cause double-stranded DNA breaks, it can cause translocations, and it can cause mutations in the cancer genes. Now, you have UV rays in the sunlight which can cause various cancers, and that is due to the formation of pyrimidine dimers within the DNA. So, in today's lecture we discussed something about the epidemiology of cancer, how cancer is common in certain cancers are common in certain populations, certain others are not common in those populations, but certain and how environmental factors contribute to the development of cancers. And we also talked about chemical carcinogenesis, how alkylating agents and other agents cause cancers either as directly acting or after being converted into active substances. And finally, we also learned a little bit about radiation induced carcinogenesis. The carcinogenesis that occurs due to infective agents, we will talk about it in a later class, because it's quite a big topic in itself. And we will also talk about the genetic changes that occur in cancers in our other lecture classes. Thank you.